Good evening. On behalf of Portage College and the Rural Development Network, I extend a warm welcome to all of you to the second presentation of our Indigenous Resilience Series. This series marks a month-long journey where we will explore and celebrate the strength, wisdom, and resilience of Indigenous communities. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that this gathering is being broadcast from the traditional lands of First Nations people, the owners of Treaty 6, which are also homelands to the Métis people. We honor the history and culture of all people who first lived and gathered on these lands. Good evening, I'm Carrie Froller, and I have the privilege of serving as the Vice President of People and Culture here at Portage College. Before we get started tonight, I'd like to have a few housekeeping items. If I could ask that you have your microphones on mute while we're doing the presentation, and feel free to use the chat if you have questions that you'd like to ask during our presentation. You can put your questions in there and we will be monitoring those, and at the end of the presentation, we'll just go back and forth and answer those questions for you. And you may have noticed there's a recording sign, so we are recording this presentation for later viewing as well. So it's with immense pride that we bring you this series tonight, virtually and in person from the Waniska room here at Portage College. And our room was built with Portage College through our Ways of Knowing Cultural Spaces initiative. Portage was established in 1968, and our college began by a sit-in that was held by First Nations and Métis people, which is a true demonstration of resilience. And we are just so thankful for their resiliency. We're also happy to be sharing the broadcast with our community today in this room, and we have a live audience as well. So I'm very happy to have our live audience here too. At this time, I would like to welcome our elder, Lester St. Arnaud from Little Red River Cree Nation in Northern Alberta. Lester is a second-year Indigenous Arts and Culture student. He is an ex-addictions counselor. He enjoys doing beautiful beading, and usually roses, because his wife's name is Rose. He does exceptional footwear, and his passion is talking to youth at summer camps as a youth elder and knowledge keeper. Elder Lester is fluent in Cree and attends ceremonies throughout the Cree territories. Elder Lester will now do our opening prayer in the Cree language, which is also in the Woodlands Cree. Would you like to come up, please? I'd like to present this for you. Thank you for doing the prayer for us today.
Kyllä nämä skumpna no kiskoa mauja. Mä puhun uuttamaan ainakin suun. Kun mä voin pihtoa yhtäyksiä, niin siinä on pikspistä mukaan. Niistä on nyt mukaan tämäksiään. Ei mä puhun uuttamaan yksi suun. Tahto kiskoa kiskana muja. Mä tiedän määrä nuhtaa. Mua siinä muu. Kiva näin tohtista tuohon. Muiksi kiihtako. Mä oon tänistä kannua, minun koista pikspistä. Mä näihtako. Aivan sanoisin, että ei siinä ole pikskit, että mä usko asumaan. Mutta ei siinä ole. Mä siis tutskaavat. Yksi on isä kautta muuta. Mä optaa, että mä suntuttaa, ei siinä ole. Mä pikskit, mä skuuttako. Niin osistikin on. Niin oppimat suunkat miittyjä. Yksi on isä, että mä kuuttamaan. Tämä on tohtaa kousiaan itsekin suokka miittämään. Kun tänne mä pääkun johtaisesti tuoskikaan miittyä. Päätä viitohtii taumus umnaanakaan miittyjä. Niistä nyt maksiaan. Niitä ystä muu tiltun. Mä pikskistä muun. Uisääkin tääkään mitään. Stisnään. Isnit mä puhun. Ikään kuin mä iso pikskään. Yksi kuis mä ei tästä muokaan. Mä piskistä muikan. Oksan että mä isuun tuutamataan, että mä puhun uuttamaan oppaat suun. Saakuista muukit ja koska ei sinua kaikki umkis pistäkäski. Uista on että muhtun kiitoa. Tämä boksi mutta kuksi ei maa. Tämä piksvistä maakuttaa. Tämä näistä kohta mä voisin mahtaa omat niistä kanvaamin opmaat suunoa. Tämä on taatista tuska ei sinu. Tämän sen pakken ghost. Tämä on stuhta. Oksanva. Ihminen saa kaata muognista. Nämä näskikat mittämään. Ääkistän mä uihkun kauin. Ääkistän mä sitten tuskaunaan. Mut näkee sinu. Koska kivattava mitään, kun ne mä jähtää huimaa. Ääpnä näyttää uskaikut. Ei mä ei ole tehtä. Ääkseni sen tuottamaan tämän, että mä ihtauja. Ei.
Lester, I have this gift of appreciation, so thank you so much for the prayer. I'd also like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to our supporters, Pembina Pipeline Corporation and CN. Their generous support has made it possible for us to offer this speaker series to everyone free of charge, enabling us to share these valuable insights without barriers. Before we begin, I'd also like to welcome my co-host, Linda Bernicki, who is representing the Rural Development Network. Linda is going to take a moment to share with us what the Rural Development Network role is and their collaboration efforts with rural and Indigenous communities across Canada. So Linda, if you're online, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks so much, Carrie, and thanks so much for the amazing prayer to start us off in a good place. As the Director of Community Development and Indigenous Engagement, I am truly honored to work for an organization that is learning together on our journey of reconciliation. And one way we are doing this together is working with leaders such as Portage College to co-host the speaker series. So a little bit about who the Rural Development Network is. Well, we're a national nonprofit organization. And we work with communities on rural sustainability and creating tangible community impact. We really understand that rural communities have unique needs, challenges, and opportunities. As many of you know, a lot of programs out there and services are created for urban centers, and they don't often serve or can't be delivered in the same way in rural and remote areas, just because of the different realities of the social and economic structures and infrastructure that exist, or too often that don't exist in communities. So I just wanted to briefly go over some of the main things that we do. So we create innovative tools and resources, including guides, toolkits, and trainings that are created in partnership with communities and are specifically designed for the unique needs of rural communities. We provide expertise and boost capacity of communities in implementing their own projects. And we do advocacy, and we help connect people in the sector to share resources and information through events and networks such as this one. And we support groups in accessing funding. So we encourage you to reach out to us to learn more at info@ruraldevelopment.ca, and we'll make sure that that's put in the chat. And if you have any questions, we're happy to answer them. And with that, I'll just pass it back to Carrie.
Thanks, Linda. I know the college has certainly benefited from a lot of partnerships with the Rural Development Network. So what we've got now is our feature for the evening. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Laurie Thompson tonight, and she's live in our studio, so that's even more exciting for us. Laurie is the Indigenous educational leader in her home community of the Kikino Metis Settlement, committed to applying the languages, culture, and history of the Metis Settlements of Alberta is a guiding principle of her 30-year practice. Laurie's interests include the history of Indigenous education, Indigenous educational leadership, curriculum development, instructional design, and Indigenous educational training and professional development. Her academic achievements include a Bachelor of Education and a Master of Arts in Leadership and Training. Laurie is currently working on a Doctor of Education in Distance Education from Athabasca University. Her presentation is Metis Net Teachings on the topic of resiliency. Please join me in welcoming Laurie to the stage. Let me just get you set up here, Laurie, so that we can get sharing the screen, and there we are. Just there we go. So we'll just move this out of the way for you. And this is the clicker right here. It's not on the presentation. It's larger. Get you going here. My mouse and my hand are not working the same. There we go.
There you go. Thank you.
It's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for this blessing to be in this beautiful, incredible room on a beautiful fall evening in the Laklavish Lakeland area. It was a beautiful drive coming in. I am truly blessed to attend tonight's speaker series and share Indigenous knowledge on the topic of resiliency. Thank you to my beautiful cousin Shelley Jackson with Public Legal Education for the recommendation, and to Carrie Frohler, who made the official request to share knowledge. And there we go, already messing it up.
You should just click to that. There you go.
Ansay Kakiawiak, Laurie Thompson, Nitsiga soon, Marcella Nagawi, Egwa Floyd Thompson, Natawi, Kikino Metis Settlement of Alberta. I've been an educator for 30 years, and the past 18 of those years have been as a school principal at Kikino School in the Kikino Metis Settlement under Northern Lights Public Schools. My first 5 years were teaching on the Beaver Lake Cree Nation, where I learned the value of community connections in our profession. I am humbled to be here today with you as an educator, a community member, and a person who is committed to the ongoing development of the Metis Settlements of Alberta and the education of all Indigenous people. I will take this time to give thanks to my parents, to my dad, who always makes time to answer my questions and who continues to challenge my thinking to consider all things, and to my mom, who will look for me and check on how I'm doing. We have great love for our parents. As a scholar, I recognize that our learning is embedded within each other. There is wisdom in the group and guidance in the group. Paul Cotray hails from the Gift Lake Metis Settlement, and he serves as a knowledge holder of our languages, culture, and history, and is my mentor for my doctoral work. It was his story about the fishing co-op in the Western settlements that inspired the development of the Metis Net Teachings that I am sharing today. As he told his story, my mind connected dots of comprehension and understanding of how Euro-Western ways of understanding knowledge are different from Indigenous ways of knowing and being. There will be no reconciliation without truth, and Indigenous people have been forced into a place of resilience resulting from society that insists on privileging Euro-Western knowledge above all other knowledges. Today, I claim primacy for Indigenous knowledge alongside Euro-Western knowledge and all other knowledges as an act of resilience. By the end of this session, you will leave knowing there exists a paradigm that lends itself to the resiliency of the people of the Metis Settlements of Alberta. There are a few key terms that will aid your understanding of our resiliency teachers in our community. The conversational method, it's a way of gathering knowledge and established within Indigenous research. The method honors oral traditions and is accepted and supported within an Indigenous paradigm of research. Elder is a term appointed to an individual by their community. Age is dependent on the community. Indigenous is referencing First Nations, Metis Settlements of Alberta, and Inuit. For the purposes of this presentation, I will use the words Metis Settlements knowledge and Indigenous knowledge interchangeably. We recognize that there exist place-based connections to knowledge. Indigenous educational leadership is unique school leadership practices that are values-based and modeled to the Indigenous community that they are grounded in. A knowledge holder refers to a person who holds specific cultural knowledge and can share or teach that knowledge. A knowledge keeper refers to a person who has been taught by elders within their community. This person holds knowledge and teachings, and they have learned how to care for these teachings and when it is right or not to share that knowledge with others. One could make the claim that the Métis people were born into resiliency. We are the children of European men and women who came from diverse walks of life to join the fur trade and took First Nations women as wives in order to secure their own survival on often unforgiving lands. The children born of these unions were seen as commodities for the Hudson Bay Company and the Northwest Company, as rather than hiring on more men from overseas, they had a ready selection of working men who knew how to survive on the land. They were resilient. Traveling ever westward, these voyageurs, who came to be known as freemen, stood for their right to choice. The choice to make a living, the choice to be their own entrepreneurial free spirit, the choice to live their lives on their own terms, the choice to choose European or First Nations customs and languages, and their choice to keep searching until they found their own land that they could call home. From the Red River to the Battle of the Frog Plain, through the rise of Laurie L and the Northwest resistance that included battles at Duck Lake and Portage, on to the failed St. Paul de Métis and the eventual Alberta Métis Population Betterment Act, we arrive at today. I stand before you as a descendant of the Red River Métis. My fifth paternal great-grandfather was named Magnus Spence. His own resiliency had him leaving Bursay, Orkney, Scotland in the latter part of the 1700s. He died in 1845 and is buried at St. Andrew's Red River Settlement. His wife, my fifth great-grandmother, was named Christiana Cree. She died in 1860 at the age of 100 and is buried in Manitoba. They were resilient. In 1990, the Alberta Metis Settlements Accord achieved the goal of securing a land base for future generations, for local autonomy, and to support economic self-sufficiency. With lands entrenched in the Alberta Constitution, we achieved what our Red River Métis ancestors longed for. We found a place to call home. We are resilient. And our collective journey is not done as we continue to evolve and adapt who we are as Metis Settlements of Alberta people as time moves on. I have introduced myself and set the context for what I am now ready to share. The net is a teaching and learning metaphor for understanding how a Metis settlements paradigm is maintained as a result of our land. Our land that set boundaries and contributed to the survivance resiliency of the Metis Settlements of Alberta people. Despite restrictive government policies meant to control, divide, and assimilate to force us into the social political fabric of Alberta and Canada, it would be the strength of what we know to be knowledge, how we attain knowledge, how we share knowledge, and our overarching relationship to knowledge that would lend strength to the physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental fronts we must maintain to be resilient. In 2019, I began my doctoral journey. I grew up in the Kikino Metis Settlement, and while my family did not have much in the way of material things, we were loved. We had food, a roof over our heads, large families, and the entirety of our communities to play in and explore. Education was an expectation in our home. I found joy in school, leading to a love of lifelong learning. At each stage of my education, I was continually confronted by opposing experiences from other Indigenous learners. While my experiences were generally successful, this was not true of many of my Indigenous relatives. It is beyond the scope of this presentation to outline the problems Indigenous people are confronted with in education. What can be stated, however, is a common denominator. They all focus on resistance to colonization. As the decades passed, I continued to love learning and leadership. My passion grew from teaching students to teaching teachers. As a school leader, I aimed to figure out pathways to disrupt societal expectations about Indigenous education and engage with local Indigenous communities about what mattered to them. I inherently understood that if I was to make a difference in student achievement, I had to make a difference with the teachers responsible for the classroom. What I was uncertain of was how to initiate and sustain a change I could not see. Initiating and sustaining change in education is challenging. The system is old and not receptive to change. I wanted to make a difference in the institution that I had always loved, but had not reciprocated my love or that of all my relations. As a school leader, I continue to identify assimilation as the ongoing purpose of the education system and experienced ongoing tension at all system levels. What I was searching for was a tool to support my leadership competencies to affect teacher quality standards that are respectful and inclusive of the Metis settlement community that we serve. I recognized that our community resilience was fading as the language, culture, and history of our people was systematically being erased. Through my doctoral learning journey, I kept a journal. This journal was a collection of thoughts and ideas, and eventually became stories that I told myself to reflect my thoughts and learning. Additionally, my journal came to hold a collection of stories told to me by others, including members of my own and other Metis Settlements of Alberta. The journal included stories told from my Indigenous supervisor and stories told to me from my dad and other members of my family. Over time, reflective practices with my journal lent me to understanding and identifying patterns relating to knowledge, truth, and systems of the Euro-Western culture that opposed those of the Metis Settlements of Alberta that I knew. Exploring language with my supervisor and knowledge holders allowed me to connect a foreign academic research process to my own indigeneity in a manner that was acceptable and made sense to me. Honestly, I felt relief at that point, as I knew that if I could not find my way, I would be lost and unable to complete the degree requirements. As a result of the Net Teachings, the following words, ontology, epistemology, axiology, and methodology became understandable, and research, learning, and leading became synonymous. While reviewing an educational website, I read that research is leadership. That statement resonated with me as I reflected on the flip side of that statement. Leadership is research. As my Indigenous scholarly understanding evolved, I opened myself up to explore conceptual models that would be accepted by the Métis people. What emerged from my doctoral journey is a Métis model of leadership and research. Conceptually, this model now guides my school-based leadership practices and my research work. This is resiliency. Disrupting discursive norms and practices can only uplift Indigenous peoples and recenter Indigenous education in Canada. The Métis model depicted in an upcoming slide supports the imperative to develop an Indigenous approach to the leadership and management of education for Indigenous learners and the education of non-Indigenous learners about what matters to Indigenous people and who they truly are. Every good story has a beginning. This one is no different, except this story emerged on the Indigenous threads of time. In the traditional storytelling time of winter, the night was dark and cold. I had been working on the conceptual framework for my research, and in frustration had paused and called Paul to ask if he would tell me a story about settlement history and fishing. This is his story. Paul leans back and gazes beyond the video messenger app glowing on his computer screen. His mind goes far back as he visually draws memories in preparation for telling a story for which I had asked. The story he is about to tell comes from his memories and pictures of his life and the time he was in partnership with his dad, Saint Germain Couture. As the oldest son, Paul recognized his responsibilities and contributed to the family income by working in the commercial fishing industry from their home in northern Alberta on the Gift Lake Metis Settlement. Paul begins his story by describing the net. His storytelling voice is slow and steady as his memory returns. The two lines are important. Without those, you don't have anything. You can get different size of nets to catch different size of fish. It has to be put away carefully. Two people help to spread it under the ice. It spreads itself out as the float keeps one line above and the lead line sinks to the bottom. When we used to fish, we would put many nets under the ice. The most we did was 60. You have to know what you're doing. We would start at 4 in the morning and we would go until late at night. The people working with you has to know what they are doing. The running line is the rope used to tie one end of your net and use a jigger to pull it, and it crawls under the ice and pulls your line. Hundreds of yards down you tie. Imagine doing that 24 to 30 times in a day. In the summer, it is easier because you let it out from the edge of your boat. We did jackfish in the spring. Nylon strings last longer. The cotton line would rot, especially if not dried right. Nylon is sturdier and stronger. In the time we fished, the line only got changed if the ice captured the net, and sometimes you would have to yank it out and it would get torn up. My dad used to do that, make nets. He had a special tool to tie. When I started with him, the nets were pre-made. When my dad fished, he made his own nets. He would get the net and tie it into the rope. The knot has to be solid as that net can hold thousands of pounds. The mesh looks delicate, but it is very strong. Usually the net gets caught in things under the water. When you pull it up, it catches. Jackfish are the worst. They're very strong and they will tear up the net. They are monsters in the lake that go through that net. They spin when they get something in the net and completely tangle it. It takes a long time to untangle a net. You develop patience doing that because you have to stand there. I did that lots. When we were done at the end of fishing season, we would take them home and untangle them. It would take hours and days. You get good at it because you learn to pull it a certain way to pull it out itself. You have to detangle that and back it out. They used to do it manually. The mesh would be square, so they would tie it by hand. The thing with a plastic net is low visibility in the water. We used to use nylon nets. The mesh would be like wrapped cable and would be a little bit stronger. The new plastic net lines are different. We started using lead lines as opposed to leads, so to avoid lead poisoning. A netting needle was used to thread the line into the net. We used to have gutting knives for cleaning thousands of fish. They are specially made for that. I know that anglers have a long pointy knife, but that is for filleting. We had fish boxes, running line at least 100 yards long, carry 2 of everything in case one broke, 2 jiggers especially. We got high tech where the jigger was a radio transmitter. Before that, there's a knocker thing on the end of the jigger. When you pull the line, you can hear it knocking. It was my job to find the jigger. You had to listen really, really well. It takes concentration. I used my right ear. I would stand still. I would tell the other person to pull the line so I could hear it. I would walk around and around to pinpoint it from my right side, and I would make the circle smaller and smaller. Not very often I would miss, maybe a couple feet. We had wire on the end and we could pull it in. We carried an ice auger. We had a bunch of stakes we would use to identify where the holes were. And we had a bunch of line to tie to the stake and a weight. The idea is to keep the nets open so the end line's close to a point. That is where you would tie the nets to keep the net spread out. The fish box is where we would put the fish to transport. We had wooden boxes, and eventually we used plastic boxes. For food, we would carry lunch. When we got hungry, we would eat. Sometimes we would take turns eating, usually just sandwiches. The fishing license numbers, those had to go on the stake. We would use a marker, and you had to have a guess of where the middle would be to keep that net in place. If tied too close to the bottom, there would be a big gap where the fish would swim over. Sometimes the fish would be close to the top and sometimes the bottom. If it was warmer, they would be close to the top. This point is where you started. The next one would be the same, but 2 nets would be tied to the same line as opposed to just 1. We would use a couple of trucks. The truck in the picture is my Dodge half-ton 1978 single cab. The picture is about 1986. My dad and I ran our fishing outfit. We were the leads and directed the rest of the team while working alongside them. My dad was trying to instill family unity as a value. It wasn't just me and my dad, it was my cousins too. This was important to my dad because this is the Métis way, including my brothers and sisters and other family in all that he did and continuing on the fishing tradition as a way of life. Paul laughs as he leans back in his chair at the conclusion of his story. The memories fade from his mind and his eyes return to the screen. I will begin by describing the net. It's pretty basic, it's not complex at all. It's comprised of ropes and mesh. It was gifted to me by an elder couple in my community of Kikino. Earlier in that week, I had called them on the telephone to ask if they had a piece of net I could have. When the couple figured out that I only wanted 5 feet rather than 100 feet, and that I was not actually going to go fishing with it, they laughed and said, yes, they did have some, and yes, I could have it. When the net arrived, I noted that the green colored rope was thinner than the other rope and 2 black floaters attached. The second heavier green, white, and black rope had lead woven into it and was attached to the bottom of the mesh. Described as a monofilament gill net, the mesh is very thin and has no color. The mesh is attached to the top of the float line and the bottom to the lead line in 1 foot intervals. That is all there is to the net, the actual net itself. What you see on the screen is the original model design. It truly is representative of the saying, the whole is greater than the sum of its part. So why the net? The Metis Settlements of Alberta people have been fishing with nets, hooks, and spears in the waters surrounding their communities from before their inception following the Métis Betterment Act in 1938. Through these practices, Métis settlements families have long since sustained themselves. For the Métis colony people, their culture and language are inseparable and intrinsically linked to the relationship between lands and waters. For the Métis settlements people, fishing is governed by laws and beliefs embedded into their languages and worldviews and centered on conservation for future generations. The commercial fishing net for many was more than a business to the people who chose the Métis settlement communities. The net was more than a way of life. The net was survival. It was food to feed the many mouths around the kitchen table. It was clothes on the backs of family, and it represented money to pay the never-ending bills. In some aspects, the net was life. For our purposes today, the net now becomes a guide where cultures come together to learn and make decisions in the work that we do with others. At times, the decisions we make are individual. They may be group decisions, organizational decisions, or even community decisions. I use the metaphoric comparison of setting up a fishing net to assist myself in explaining and supporting understanding of how this net guides our own truth and reconciliation journey as we prepare to welcome learners back into our buildings and supporting their learning journeys. We will explore 12 sections of the net, beginning with the decision to go fishing, choosing a net, prepping the net, setting the net, anchoring it, checking the float line and lead line, both edges and the bridles. I will share my personal experiences of catches, lessons from the catch, and close with putting the net away for next use as we begin the fall season of our lives. I will go through each section of the net and explain its connection to Metis teachings as a way of understanding us as Metis people and connect to our own perspectives of how and why we are resilient, as well as our own interpretation of the word resiliency, as explained at the beginning of this presentation. We go fishing more than we realize. We seek new understandings. We search for knowledge and answers to the unknown. We ask questions. The water represents the knowledge that continues to flow through time, place, and space despite us all. So willing to be shared with all. Water is the life-giving substance in relationship with all of the earth and that which surrounds it. When placed in the water, the net begins expanding with pride and purpose and takes on a quality inclusive of survival, opportunity, and purpose. Renewed with the knowledge that it knows what to do, the net only has to be set up and then one waits. This reflective opportunity to rest and enjoy what is flowing around and through is time to prepare for the bounty that is almost always sure to come. Waiting provides the space and time to gather in laughter, eat, have a drink, and talk about the events of the day. That is resiliency. Choosing a net is not as simple as it seems. There are many types of nets serving many purposes. This is also true of reality. What is real? And who is part of this reality? Knowledge is centered on the real lived experiences of those who chose the Metis settlements for a home. I read their stories in local booklets, past reports, past surveys, and past pictures. The voices of the here and now in our communities reflect those real lives and real experiences. The voices include our elders, youth, community members, community leaders, those serving in our communities, elected members who sit on various boards, as well as council members who took time to share with me in their travels. In relation to resiliency, some individuals told me about the Cree language. Why bother? No one really knows and they don't even care. In regards to history, I found that some of our leaders do not know much about our history. Our members know even less, and our kids know almost nothing. Research shows us that when a language is lost, culture is next to fall. And when language and culture fall, history no longer exists. In resiliency lies hope. I heard throughout each settlement the strong belief that the Cree language must be prioritized at every opportunity and that we cannot wait for language teachers. We all must learn in any capacity available. Onus is put on schools to take a holistic approach to language strengthening while the community joins in, including leaders, staff at Head Starts, health and family resource networks, and any person who interacts with the community at large. In our quest to explore resiliency as it relates to Métis people, we must maintain that we are considering real people with real lives and real lived experiences that inform the knowledge. My net needs care. If I do not treat it with respect, it gets very tangled and it takes me a bit of time to sort it out. I have learned that care of the net begins before it even gets used. I prepped this net by reflecting on the initial request for knowledge. I reviewed my community notes and I took time to think about and plan what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it. I had my net and I was ready to set it. Resiliency means prepping the net with care before it is used. Choosing a spot to set a net is important, and it depends on what you want to catch. I have been taught that the net can be set high, set low, or set at different spots on a lake or river, depending on what you want to catch. I stood on the banks of many beautiful lakes and rivers in our Metis settlements in my travels. Each was just as beautiful as the last. This net location is the Metis Settlements of Alberta. Bound by our land, it would be the land that afforded us the necessary attributes, including resiliency, to survive the ongoing political themes of control, division, and assimilation policies at the federal and provincial levels. I have seen the land anchor that the net is tied to hold it in place, often a stump, a stout stick, or even a tree. The rope joins the land and the water through the net. Without that anchor, the net cannot do its job. I see the land anchors as our knowledge holders and knowledge keepers. I understand these phrases to mean different things. Knowledge keepers are responsible to hold knowledge and share it out according to laws and customs of the community. There were a few times when I asked a question and a soft-spoken elder would inform me that that knowledge was not for me at this time. I did not question those responses, and that is the way it is of our ways, and that is okay. Knowledge keepers have that inherited right to decide who has access. They are our teachers. I was at a community culture camp last summer and noted that knowledge holder Dave Lamouche noticed that the young people had gathered wood for smoking meat, but they had selected an incorrect type of wood. He showed them the correct wood that would result in tastier smoked meat. So many storytellers and teachers in all of our communities. I also learned very quickly that knowledge holders have a deadly sense of humor as I watched a gentleman filleting fish, and I asked him why he had a pile of white fish pieces beside him. And he told me they were fish bowls, and they were pretty tasty. I stopped and wondered, do fish really have bowls? I later learned they were fish cheeks, and they were a small nugget of meat just below the eyes. Resiliency is found in the humor, stories, and teachings of our elders, knowledge holders, and knowledge keepers, and we must hang on to them. I learned that the float line has floaters that keep the net afloat. They represent what the Metis Settlements of Alberta consider as real. In Euro-Western academia, this is called ontology. What I learned is that there are multiple realities that exist because there are multiple relationships that exist around common things. Like the little knots in the mesh, there are many different relationships. The big floaters that support resiliency for the Metis settlements are community, culture, and collaboration. These big floaters are in direct connection to the lead line at the bottom of the net. The lead line represents how we know things. In Euro-Western culture, this is known as epistemology. As Métis people, we know things. We know how and when to do things. I have learned that as Métis settlement people, we all have a one-to-one relationship with what is grounding around us. There are no two same relationships with anything in our world. We know that our history, how we see the world, our land with places and spaces, our spirituality and our culture and language, our systems and living processes. Like the lead line, they keep us grounded and connected to the float line. It is the relationship to community, culture, collaboration that form the living processes that we exist in and lend to our resiliency to maintain our hold on our language, culture, and history. Every one of those knots on the net represent those relationships and reveal the resiliency of our people and our communities. The line running top to bottom as the submerged edge of the net can be seen as Indigenous axiology. Indigenous axiology is built on what is most valuable to the Indigenous people. This line teaches us all that relational accountability to fulfill roles and obligations committed to, or as promised is essential for success. Additionally, the line represents the inseparable relationships that must be formed and valued as part of Indigenous value systems. Accountability within this line is strengthened because the knowledge interpreted must be respectful of and help build on the established relationships that emerge from the process of learning together. This contributes to defining connections within the knowledge network. This is an aspect of resiliency at its finest. The fourth edge completes the interrelationship of this teaching, which is understanding a system of values and methods for a particular purpose. Reaching out and away from shore are the bridles, also known as guidelines, two ropes that come together to form a V and can be attached to a second net if needed. There is an edge of the net on this end as well. This edge points to the destination and acts as a guide. For this exploration, the destination was somewhere way out there, almost needing binoculars to see as far back and as far forward as we asked, what is resiliency and how is it defined for the Metis Settlements of Alberta? The top bridle represents the story strategies used. Stories are shared, gathered around tables. We witness stories in action as experiences with our languages, culture, and history as we live our lives. We now listen to stories of the past in community history books, in governance documents, as well as pictures and videos. The bottom bridle represents the values that become guides for us to live our lives in a good way. These values include all my relations, giving and receiving, behaving correctly, having meaningful connections, treating and thinking about someone or something in a good way, and treating or thinking about someone or something in a deep spiritual way. Every single moment of our life journey is about learning together. That is resiliency. The guidelines, they are as necessary to this exploration as they are to the net. Without the guidelines, the net will not work. I can tell you this net is working. We are catching a lot more than we ever expected. As varied as a lake catch of mariah, suckers, tullaby, pickerel, perch, and jackfish, the Métis settlements are about healing, choices, determination, and back-breaking survival. Like the whitefish that was the most commercial and the best eats, they do not have many bones. Resiliency for the Métis settlements had led the Métis Population Betterment Act 1938 to the Métis Settlements Accord legislation 1990. Through these triumphs, successes, and beliefs, there emerges challenges, collapse, loss, and despair. Like the jackfish that has just way too many bones, we live with trauma, bad choices, unsuccessful leadership, and abuse in many forms. And just as most of the smoked fish produced was whitefish, most of what exists today for the people of the settlements has been an unwavering hope for a better tomorrow as we build on the efforts of our ancestors. That is resiliency. The success of a net is only as good as the one setting it. The net centered on resilience and key themes emerged: community, culture, and togetherness. Resiliency for the Métis Settlements of Alberta will continue to depend on us increasing the number of fluent Cree speakers. There is deep knowledge in our language. Increase the number of proficient Cree speakers. They are our future knowledge holders. Increase the number of learners of Cree. This is relational and prioritizes Wakotuin, all my relations. We must build the capacity of the Métis Settlements of Alberta to strengthen history, culture, and language together. We must ensure access to Métis Settlements of Alberta history, culture, and language for all members and residents. We must uplift the status of the history, culture, and language strengthening at all levels within the Métis Settlements of Alberta and create opportunities and space for history, culture, and language learning within the community. Continued preservation of the Metis Settlements of Alberta history, culture, and language must be prioritized. As we prepare to put our net away, we must attend to it with care. It has to be put away methodically so it doesn't tangle up. When you pull it back out, it has to come out smoothly. That is resiliency. Our net is not a one-time use. We set this net time and time again, otherwise we will go hungry. My net came from a forgotten stored box. I could see remnants of fish left behind as dark, flaky skin. My net has 2 holes, one small, the other large. I thought of the remaining fish remnants as representation of the reciprocity of Indigenous peoples' interdependence with the water and the land. Like knowledge flaked and wiped away, those flakes reminded me of Indigenous knowledge lost in life transitions. I thought of the 2 holes as the history, culture, and languages we have lost due to colonization. Nevertheless, those spaces reminded me of opportunities being called to fill. That is resiliency. This story has no end, but time restrictions must bring this story to a pause. We began with a request for knowledge around the topic of resiliency and the Metis Settlements of Alberta. I shared what I knew and took the opportunity to continue advocacy for the acknowledgement and understanding of the Metis Settlements of Alberta. Resilience is more than the ability to withstand adversity. Resiliency defines the ability to work through pain and suffering. It is the ability to survive. As in any story, there is always a next chapter. For this story, the Metis Net Teachings serves as the hub of the Metis cartwheel. The hub is the strongest part around which everything else revolves. The hub is our reason for existence, how we understand our existence, and the meaning of that existence. Knowing that is resilience. The remainder of the wheel and the 4 seasons surrounding it are the next chapters in truth and reconciliation for the Metis Settlements of Alberta. Within this learning object are teachings that I have been given permission to share and inform the educational leaders supporting teaching and learning of our people. Its existence is intended to disrupt discursive norms and place education and leadership development under an Indigenous lens. This wheel grounds and centers Métis settlement worldviews, philosophies, approaches to teaching, learning, and leading. The story of the Métis man's fishing net will appear as a book chapter titled Metis Settlements Net Teachings, Ethics of Indigenous Educational Leadership Bundles. It will appear as a chapter authored by myself and my Athabasca doctoral advisor, Dr. Deborah Hoven, in an edited book titled From Diverse to Equitable and Inclusive School Leadership, and is set to be published under Canadian Scholars Publication in 2024. Thank you for joining us in our learning journey today. Hi, hi.
Just stand up here. We'll just do some questions, but I'll stop sharing. There we go. Thank you so much, Laurie. That
You're welcome.
was so informative, and just your stories was amazing. So we really appreciate that.
Thank you.
If you have a few minutes, maybe we could get some questions if there's questions from our audience here or online. But before we do that, I'm going to go to Linda and see if Linda has any questions, our co-host. Linda, do you have any questions that you'd like to ask Laurie?
First, I would just like to say what a powerful presentation. And thank you so much. I learned so much, and I just really want to thank you for sharing your knowledge and your time with us, and engaging in conversation with us. And we have, comments about somebody commented, I love the thought that we fish more than we think. Great presentation, Laurie. Very proud of you and the work that you were doing. And what a great way to use Métis harvesting and other items to share culture and other teachings. And as people are starting to put items in there, I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about how, as non-Indigenous people, how we could play a part in ensuring that the history, culture, and language continues, and what could our role be?
That's an exceptional, thought-provoking pathway for truth and reconciliation. I've given a lot of thought to this as an educator on allies and accomplices. And I think one of the most important things that non-Indigenous people can do is to support the stance that there is an Indigenous paradigm of learning and of knowledge, and that privileging Euro-Western ways of knowing does not support any pathway to reconciliation. So simply putting up Cree words or hanging a sash is not enough, because the actions must come from inside here as we look at what is truth and reconciliation to guide our own internal actions. It's not organizations, it's individuals that must choose the actions they're going to take, and not just understanding, but how do we move that forward to support learning at both the primary, secondary, and post-secondary levels for our learners. And so for some of our educational systems, it's looking at learning design, how learning design can incorporate Indigenous ways of knowing and being within that design spectrum. When we look at other organizations like the Rural Development Network, to work with our small rural communities to continue opportunities like this, to engage first in learning, and then in learning to set out pathways for action. Too often people try to jump into an action without really understanding that they are privileging Euro-Western ways. And when I say that, I'll often say, I don't need an ally. I often need to take the time to teach the ally what they need to do. I want an accomplice. That accomplice has my back, and I don't need to teach them. They already know what I need them to be doing with me. And so we're looking at transitioning our allies into accomplices. My brain's going faster than my mouth. So again, just going back to opportunities like this are exceptional actions, and continuing these conversations and taking them, how can we take them to these next places and spaces?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Joy is saying thank you so much for your presentation. I really enjoyed learning about the net teachings, and especially Paul's story. I could picture the nets and the fishing. And her question is what is one thing you would like everyone here to take away? I mean, you talked about so much stuff, and there's so much that we could take away, but if there was one thing that you would want people to walk away with, what would that be?
The one thing that I would wish for everybody to walk away from this is to privilege Indigenous knowledge alongside Euro-Western knowledge and all other knowledges. That would be my wish.
Thank you. And I'll just pass it back to Carrie for a minute to see if there's any questions in the room.
Okay, so are the hands rising in the room? Let's see. Does anyone have any questions for Laurie? You're letting her off the hook.
Any comments?
Comments? Go ahead, Rob.
I found it very interesting.
Get you to speak up a bit,
I
Rob.
found it quite interesting when you started it, when you said research. I apologize if I'm not quoting, but research is leadership.
And leadership is research.
Could you expand on that? I found that quite intriguing.
Well, I'm an educator, so I'm always seeking out data to inform decisions in the work that I do with my community. And I always have one foot in that Euro-Western world of education as a system. And so that's where the word research comes from. As Indigenous people, they did not go say, oh, let's go researching as they're looking for medicines. They didn't do that. But what were they doing? They were seeking out knowledge. And so they were doing it by being active, going out there, trying different things. But we don't have that word research. There's no such word in the Indigenous language because that's not what we do. They take it to a way when you say the word research, all of a sudden it's Euro-Western ways of claiming knowledge, owning knowledge, trying to hide knowledge in academia. And so for me, we in the Euro-Western, they privilege get your high school diploma, and then you go get your bachelor, and then you go get your master's, and then you go get your doctorate. Those don't mean nothing to my beautiful mom who sits at home. I'm still Laurie when I walk in that house and do the dishes, you know, so, but that is the way of things. In Indigenous communities, what we speak of is our elders, our knowledge holders, and our knowledge keepers. They are far more intelligent than I will ever be with all of my pieces of paper. Yet we negate that. We do not privilege it with that same respect we show for our knowledge holders. My dad completed grade 12. He is the most beautiful, intelligent leader I have ever come across. And he constantly seeks out knowledge. He's in his 70s, he's retired. He sits on many boards. He's always learning, reading, he's researching. But he doesn't call it that because in his quest, it's always for our people. And for us, knowledge is always for our people. It's not for self-gain. It's not to hide it away in an institution. It is to be shared out like the water. And we lose that in academia. And so that is, for me, that's my statement as a leader and how I've come to know leadership, walking both worlds. And it was meaningful for me as a leader in schools because I still see, and I will stand here in front of a recording. There is one purpose of education, and that is to assimilate. And I would challenge anybody to tell me different. Because I've been through it all. So yeah, that's what that meant.
Over, go ahead.
You know, I found it very interesting tying the net to the history for the Métis and the First Nations. I look around the room here, I think of the Lebicans, the Shambos, the Skolliks, the Lavalies, the Bushies.
Mhm.
They taught us how to fish when we got here. We had 3 commercial stations in Lac-des-Biches.
Mhm. They were teaching you knowledge.
Yes, and they taught us how to handle the net, how to fish. It was very frustrating, but we learned. The government in 2014 took away the commercial fishing, but they allowed the rights for the Métis and the First Nations, which was, so I found it very interesting.
Thank you.
Any
Robert,
other questions?
Robert,
Oh,
do you have a
Robert,
comment?
Questions, comment?
Yes, I just appreciate everything you do, Laurie. I know how you turned that school around when you started, all your information, all your wisdom. You do an amazing job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Go ahead.
When I think back of the elders that I sat with years ago, and one of their thoughts and say, well, you know, you live in a different world. It's different in the sense that you'll be challenged in many ways because of Western society. And what I get from her story is I think we need to kind of value change for survival. We're going to change our values in order to survive in this world. I've been saying that for a long time. You know, that's cool.
Hi.
Well, I think I see the woods stuff. You know, the school, how we translate our language and we doesn't, you know, sometimes it doesn't fit. A lot of times they don't understand that. You said research. We say in Portage, not so. In Toscana, wait.
Yeah.
In saying that is in Tajikistan is in Hawas, a small tribe, and Tajikistan. We as elders, we have a responsibility to become the ones and you know, teach us.
Yeah.
So stuff like that. In any community, you know, the community I come from, we have young people passing away 3 or 4 a month. And when I became a drug and alcohol counselor, Western philosophies of teaching didn't fit. I had to change that. I had to go back to the elders and ask them, can I use this? Can I use this to make them understand? Nihilo. I based my teachings on who am I? Nihilo. And that's how I thought is understanding who you are as a person. Nihilo. Who are you? You have your mind, you have your emotions, you have your spirit, your body. What you do with that? How do you learn that? What happens here? Understanding your own emotions. A lot of them understand that they can't express what they're. So, you know, this is how I feel, but tell me exactly how you feel. They can't express that. Doing what you express outward with anger or frustration.
Yeah.
Back to my grandfather's teachings. That's my woman. Mira que esto está todo, está diciendo que esto se haga. We got to format. But so a way of understanding your own environment. We're all connected to it. And understanding that it makes me happy to for a young person to be able to understand, consider an elder to understand and put it down on a piece of paper. Others understand where you come. And I thank you for that, for sharing some of the stories the elders have happened. I come from northern Alberta. My teachings are a lot some similar to Plains Free. A lot of it is a different way of looking at like something.
Okay. We have one more question from.
Yeah. Laurie, what caught my attention was when you started off with your presentation, a comment. And as you know, I worked with your dad for many, many years. When we went to ABC, 73, we were at about 69 to 70% Métis or First Nations, probably very high now. The one comment that I always, when talking to these people, I would say, speak your language. If you lose your language, you lose your culture.
Yep.
And I was glad to see you. Thank you.
You're welcome. I couldn't help thinking, Laurie, as you were speaking. So as I mentioned earlier, we're broadcasting from the Wanska room here at the college. And as I mentioned, we started with a sit-in. On our wall in the Wanska room is the people who were at the sit-in. And I couldn't help thinking how proud they would have been to hear you speak tonight and how inspirational that was for them.
It was nice to stand here
Yeah.
because there's my dad.
Oh, do you want to point them out?
Yeah, go. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. There we go.
And over here, the late William Erasmus, who donated the land to the school where our school resides on today, to ensure that he understood that education was going to be critical to the survival of our people, and that we have to educate our people and still retain who we are as Metis Settlements of Alberta people. And I have to laugh now that the government tried to take that away by putting this on our land, but it was that very act that gave us the resiliency to maintain and hold on to who we are. And so this dichotomy of a Euro-Western system and education and Indigenous people standing for their right, for their knowledge, is still here. And it's still here within the college. And that's testament to the history and the power of the Indigenous people and the Métis people who founded this area in Lac La Biche and welcomed the immigrants who came and helped them forge together cultural identity that helped us.
Yeah.
And so that is the beautiful part of this. And at first I was thinking, oh, but they're over there, how am I gonna do this? I started talking to them.
Yeah.
That's who I was talking to.
And they heard you. Right on. Well, I can't thank you enough, Laurie, for coming. Linda, did you have any final words before we go on to our next?
Just somebody, as you were finishing talking at the picture there, resiliency in action is Laurie standing in front of those people.
Yeah, that's true.
And now we're going to get everyone crying. You know, when we were talking with Laurie and she mentioned thanking Shelley Jackson, who's incredible as well in the speaking that she does, for recommending Laurie. And as we were chatting, we were talking about honorariums and payment and whatnot. And Laurie's first comment was, well, you know, if I have to take it, I'll give it to the children. So that's what she's done. She's donating it to her school and to the children for school supplies. And so right from the first meeting with Laurie, we were in tears. So I just can't thank you enough for making this an awesome evening for all of us listening. And thank you on behalf of RDN and the college, Pembina and CN.
Oh, thank you. Got a bag of paper.
You did. There's something else. So thank you everyone for attending our speaker series tonight. We know that Laurie is going to be a very hard act to follow, but we are thrilled to announce that our next presenters in this series are from Four Winds Showcase and Market. We will feel the power of the Indigenous spoken word from artist Sheena T. Kane, who will perform a couple of her powerful pieces in which she talks about the struggles of growing up as an Indigenous youth and woman, her journey out of poverty and addiction to the very successful position that she is as a model, a stunt actress, a leading actress, personal trainer, and an online influencer. And we will also celebrate hip hop artist Tony Tutsis, a local hip hop artist and grass dancer, and he'll give us some background and storytelling to the audience about traditional Indigenous dance, and specifically the story and traditions behind the grass dance. He will dance a straight powwow song as well as a crow hop, and will explain the differences between each dance. So both Sheena and Tony are paving the way for Indigenous youth. So I hope that you'll be able to join us. We'll be doing that virtually. Again, we'll have a live session in the Wanska room, but if you could please join us, be sure to register that on Eventbrite. So thank you so much for being here tonight and letting us embark on this enlightening journey of resilience, knowledge, and unity throughout the month of September. So thank you for joining us, everyone.